Hi everyone and welcome to episode 107 of the Rewarding Property Decisions podcast. Well, the spring market is well and truly underway. I know I've said that last couple of episodes, but it definitely is now. We've got the AFL Grand Final coming up this week. Obviously school holidays are well underway, and also the weather is finally starting to warm up here in cold old Melbourne. But obviously that also means a significant increase in auction volumes for this time of year. It's been well in excess of 1,000 over the last couple of weeks. We'll have a fairly quiet weekend, obviously, with the grand final this weekend, but then it will really build through October and into November, where we'll consistently see in excess of 1,000 auctions. So we get a lot of questions, obviously, at this time of year around auctions and around bidding, and there are a lot of misunderstandings around the dynamics that occur with auctions. And that they can be very fluid. A lot of people go to auctions with a preconceived plan that this is what I'm going to do today. And I've been to plenty of auctions over my career. I've never seen the exact same one play out 2 weeks in a row. So it's something that you do need to be very mindful of. But today I thought we'd go over some of the elements of an auction and who really controls the process and how you can tip things in your favour depending upon what seat you're sitting in on any particular day. But no matter who you are, at different points, you're never going to be in complete control of the auction. And we'll go through the different personalities and how they are, but it's really how you handle the different moments, how you react, how you respond, that will differentiate whether or not you'll achieve a disappointing or a successful result come auction day. So first things first, let's have a look at the different participants involved in an auction. First one obviously being the auctioneer, second one being the vendor, and the third being the bidders. Now there's different elements to the bidders, which we'll go through in a minute, but they're the three main parties that are involved. So let's go through them each one by one. Firstly being the auctioneer / real estate agent. They've probably got the most oversight of anyone involved in the process. Particularly because they get to speak to everyone. So they get to interpret everyone's perspective, position, where they're sitting and what they think. So they can then obviously have a degree of influence over each of those parties as well, determined by how much information they provide, how much they gather from each party, and then they can control certain other aspects of the auction process as well. So things like the quote range. So the quote range is reflective of the agent's position and perspective on where value sits for that property. Obviously, the vendor gets to determine what the reserve will be, and the quote needs to be in line with the vendor's expectations. But it doesn't have to be. It's not the vendor's choice. So they get to choose where they'll pitch the property to the market. They certainly get to control the amount of information that's provided to each of the other parties, whether or not it's just interested parties attending open for inspections, or whether or not it's actually providing information to vendors and to buyers who are directly interested in that property. They'll look at where they think they should be opening the bidding. Again, a lot of this is done in conjunction with the vendor, but the agent has a lot of control over what will occur in this space. So whether or not they'll start the bidding at the bottom end of their quote, sometimes even below the quote, or whether it might be at the mid-range of the quote for differing reasons, but there is control over that process as to what they'll do and where. And then they also get to control the bidding increments. Now, a lot of buyers make this mistake of thinking that they can put a bid in and that the auctioneer must accept their bid. It is up to the auctioneer's discretion as to what bidding increments they'll take. So if they're deciding that they want to be accepting $25,000 increments and someone puts forward a $5,000 and they say, sorry, I'm not taking that, they have every right to do that. And so buyers sometimes get a little bit frustrated and angry that they think they should be accepting that. They've got no obligation to make sure that it comes up to where they want it to be. And then they'll also get to determine when and if they will pass a property in and how quickly they'll do that. So depending upon the levels of interest that they've got, other parties, but they get to say, right, I've had enough here, or we're not getting the engagement, I'm just going to pass it in and deal either directly with this party or whether or not it's on a vendor bid so that then I can deal with everyone. So it is up to the agent's discretion in that part. So there is a lot of control there, and at different stages during the auction process, they can take that control back. So things like it might be on a genuine bid, and then it might be that they decide that they're going to put a vendor bid in over the top to try and take the bidding up to a higher level. So it's important to understand the control that the agent does have. Next is the vendor. Now, the vendor in many ways has the most say, as they should. It's their property, so they're going to decide whether or not the property reaches an acceptable level as to whether or not they're going to sell or not, and at what price they are comfortable to sell the property. Now, obviously, as we said before, the agent's going to make recommendations, but it will then be up to the strength of the vendor's convictions as to whether or not they take that advice and then make their decisions accordingly. The thing from a vendor's perspective, I think one of the most important things, and sometimes vendors, because they don't do this every day, can get this wrong, is you really need to understand how to read an auction to really know when and if you should be putting a property on the market. And giving the agent the green light to declare on the market and what stage is an absolutely vital part to that. So if you declare the property on the market or allow the auctioneer to put the property on the market too soon, the auction bidding could pull up short, particularly if you've got one party that's stronger than another, and then because you've declared it on the market, it's done. You've got to sell it at that price. So being able to read as to whether or not you should put it on yet is important. But then if you put it on too late, buyers can lose confidence in the process. That if you're holding back and buyers feel as though the property should be on the market, many will sit back and say, okay, well, if he's not serious about or she's not serious about selling, then I'm not going to bid anymore. And we'll just let this pass in and we'll see how this plays out. So there's a delicate balancing act there you do need to get right. So there's a few tips from a vendor's perspective that I would look at. It's really important prior to an auction to get a very clear rundown from your agent as to who the interested parties are, what sort of terms they've requested, what sort of engagement they've had, what sort of history the agent may have with those buyers, so that you've got a really clear, concise picture as to what potentially could play out come auction day. And also, which most auctioneers are very good at doing this, providing you with the different scenarios that could play out. So whether or not it passes in on a vendor bid, passes in after one or two bids, and then gets to the point where it's on the market and property sells. So there's different scenarios that play out, and it's important to get a really clear rundown on what could happen there. I think it's also really important, as I said before, about reading an auction, to be able to at least hear what's going on, but preferably see, so that you can get a visual as to who's bidding, how they're bidding, the body language that they've got. All those sorts of things can come into play when making a decision around whether a property is ready to be sold or whether or not perhaps you need to pass it in. Now, auctions, the thing that a lot of vendors do get worried about too, and I think this is a really important component, is that they may just form part of the campaign. They aren't necessarily the conclusion to the campaign. So sometimes it's not a case of, well, we haven't had a successful result, we didn't sell under the hammer. That's not true. You can get a really good successful result by passing a property in and actually getting more than what you would if you declared it on the market. So make sure that you understand that the auction process has different scenarios and different ways of playing out, but always do your best to keep calm, which is a very easy thing for someone to say, but not necessarily always an easy thing to do. Finally, we've got the bidders. And from a bidder's perspective, I'd probably divide it into two. They've got you as you being the bidder versus everyone else that you're bidding against. Because obviously there's multiple bidders involved or can be multiple bidders involved in an auction. So you can control you and how you might be able to influence, but you can't necessarily control others. But you can then look to take control back from other bidders. So that's what we'll look at today. Now, as I said earlier, the one thing that many bidders make is that they assume that today I'm going to do this. They go to an auction with a preconceived plan. I've been doing this for, as I said, a long time now, and I've never seen the same auction play out twice. So going with a preconceived plan can be fraught with danger. You really need to be quite fluid. Auctions are very dynamic, so you do need to be agile and be able to think on your feet. Now, as a bidder, there are a lot of things that you can control in the auction process. You get to determine when you're going to bid. So do you want to open the bidding? Do you want to wait till others have come in? Do you want to wait till the property's been declared on the market? At what stage do you want to start your bidding? What increments you're going to bid in? Now, that's within reason. As I said earlier, it's absolutely up to the agent's discretion to determine whether or not they're going to accept bids, but you can certainly try to knock things down. I've never seen an auctioneer not take a higher bid, but they can certainly say to you, no, look, I'm in a larger increment than that because I'm not quite at the near the vendor's reserve yet. And then you can obviously determine how often you're going to bid. You can start the bidding and then you can drop out and then you can come back in. So there's different ways and means that you can control a lot about what occurs at an auction. But there is also still a lot you can't control. And if you aren't aware of what's going on, then that's where you can lose the ability to secure the property if you're not prepared to bid at the right time and get involved in the auction process at the right time. So first and foremost, and I've done a number of podcasts on bidding at auction and things. So if you'd like to look at that, you can certainly go back and see. But firstly, positioning yourself at an auction, I think, is a really important thing. And you want to be able to see a majority of the crowd without making significant movements and turning your head around. So position yourself so that you can see most of the crowd, obviously the auctioneer as well. You need to make sure that, that the auctioneer can see you. And you really don't want to get caught perhaps with one of your competitors standing right over your back shoulder. Preference is that you're standing over someone else's. So make sure that you're aware of what's going on around you and be prepared to move if you need to. Not necessarily once you've started bidding, but before the bidding process starts. If you don't feel like you're in the right spot, move. There's no problem with doing that. Watch for body language. And I think this is probably the biggest one that you can control, is to look at how people are behaving. One of the most common things is a change in confidence levels or a change in stature or bidding that you can really be quite clear and look for in the bidding process. People can, for instance, go from bidding really quickly and confidently to all of a sudden stopping, slowing, reducing increments, and the confidence level changes, which typically means people are starting come towards the end of their limit. Bidders that perhaps have been focused absolutely intently on every word that the auctioneer is saying to all of a sudden going and starting to talk to a partner or a friend that's attended the auction with them. Again, starts to tell you that things have changed and something's different about what they're looking to do. Or it could be just as simple as someone who's been standing dead still and all of a sudden starts shifting their feet, or hands in pockets come out and start wringing their hands in front of them. There's a lot of different signs that you can look for. Next one is always ensure if the property is going to pass in within your budget, that it's going to pass into you. A lot of buyers make mistake around thinking that, well, I'll wait for the property to hit the market. Well, if you don't bid, the property perhaps can't get on the market. So you can wait as long as there's other engagement going along. But if you're the only one, or there's only one other party, if you wait, you could be waiting a long time and the property may sell out from underneath you. They also wait and think, oh, I'll just speak to the agent afterwards. Well, there may not be an afterwards if it's going to pass in on a genuine bid, or if you let it pass in on a vendor bid, then you leave it open to the agent to speak to everyone else as well. You don't want to get caught bidding. And the other worry that people have is they don't want to get caught bidding against themselves. The property's not on the market and it's well within your budget. You want to have the control. Now, I'm not saying that you should be jumping bids significantly. And as I said before, every scenario is different. But don't get caught losing control of that process. That's a surefire way for you to be able to control, is to have a property pass into you. That's where you can lose it if an auctioneer passes in on a vendor bid, and you can very quickly lose control of that process. So you want to secure the right to negotiate at the vendor's reserve price. Now, you're in no obligation to actually pay that price, but it gives you the opportunity to negotiate at it. If you choose not to pay that price, then it could be up for grabs. But at least you've then got the choice. If you don't have it passed into you, you lose that opportunity. And if the property does pass in, don't go inside. That's the first trick the agents will try and get you. You lose control then of being able to observe what's going on around you, who's stayed. Perhaps you can then see if it's most of the crowd's been neighbours because they all disappear into their own homes, or is it just family members who are excited to see the result? So it gives you a lot of control being able to stay at the front and see what's going on. And then the final one is don't be afraid to walk away. But also, on the flip side of that, don't let your ego get in the way of putting a deal together. So there's two elements to this, and I see this quite regularly from both sides. Being prepared to walk away can be a really powerful tool from a buyer's perspective, both from your own mindset. So to be able to really have the confidence to be able to say, no, look, I really feel confident that I can walk here and not have to pay that price. But it also sends a clear message to the agent and to the vendor as well. But make no mistake, they want to put a deal together. So the auctioneer and the agent will be really trying to get you there and get you to put it together. But if you are going to threaten to walk away, make sure you're prepared to do it. Don't just make an empty threat, because as soon as you start making empty threats that you won't follow through on, that puts the power back in the auctioneer's hand. Because if you keep saying, I'm going to walk, but you don't go anywhere, then the auctioneer knows the message that you're actually sending. It's an empty threat, and that will build confidence for them and their vendor. But on the flip side of that, as I said before, don't let your ego get in the way of putting a deal together. And quite often the easiest way to check that is to take a step back and think, this morning, before I came to this auction, if someone had told me I was going to get to buy this property for the price that the agent is now offering it to me, what would I have thought? Would I have been really happy with that price? And chances are you possibly would. Now, that doesn't mean that that's what you should be paying under the current circumstances. But if you're not that far apart and there's a deal to be put together, what you don't want to do is get home and then think, oh, I should have done that. And then all of a sudden the property's been advertised to the general market and someone else gets involved. And then all of a sudden you get caught in a blind negotiation where you don't have the transparency of knowing what's going on. So the ego can be a good thing, but it can be a damaging thing when it comes to negotiations as well. So they're all very different auctions, as we've said before. And no matter the position that you're in when you're at an auction, it's important to always be aware of the different scenarios that could play out and never try and preempt an outcome from a vendor or from a buyer's perspective, because it could play out differently each way. All right, so excuse me, the case study for today, we bought an investment property for a client a number of years ago in East Melbourne. We turned up at the auction and it was not overly competitive. There was a number of bidders at the property, but there was actually two others. But it didn't. The bidding between ourselves and these other two parties went backwards and forwards, but it didn't quite get to the vendor's reserve. It actually didn't quite get to, I think it was about $5,000 short of the top end of the quote price at the time. So the property was passed in, and obviously we ensured that it was passed into ourselves to make sure that we had the right to negotiate. Now, we were not surprised that it passed in because it was still in the quote, but we were thinking that it shouldn't have been too much further than where it was. Now, the auctioneer then informed us that the reserve was about $50,000 above the top end of the quote, which is not an unusual tactic in the terms of they're trying to set some fat to try and get us above the quote to try and get it to a price that they would be happy with. But it soon became pretty evident that and it was more the vendor from what I could gather on this day than it was the auctioneer, but that the vendor was being unreasonable and that the auctioneer didn't have a lot of control with this vendor at that point in time. So I explained to them that we'd be prepared to go to the top end of the quote, but that was it. So we were prepared to give $5,000, but that we weren't going to be going any more. And that still didn't work. They still wouldn't engage. They wouldn't even come down off the $50,000. So at that point in time, I did threaten to walk because this was an investment property for our client, and my client was there, and he was very happy to do so at the time. So, and the vendor came back and said, fine, walk. We don't care. It's not enough. So we did, and we left. As I said before, the key was that from there on after that auction is to not then go back and chase the vendor. We needed to go and chase the auctioneer, sorry. So we went silent. I didn't call back the auctioneer. I waited and waited. I actually didn't have to wait very long. It was about an hour later, I got a phone call from the auctioneer saying, oh, well, if you come up another $20,000, we'll sell it. And I said to him, no, we're done. We told you we came up. The vendor wasn't prepared to engage. We're more than happy to go and look for an alternate investment property. We don't have to be in East Melbourne. We can be elsewhere. So tell your vendor thanks, but no thanks. And then within another half an hour of that, I got a further phone call saying, okay, we'll take your offer. So they took the original price. So in that circumstance, being prepared to walk certainly played dividends. It gave the vendor a bit of a spook who thought that they were in control, when in actual fact at that point in time, we'd taken control back. So great outcome. Client was very happy. It's been a great property for them. It's leased out very well and consistently on a strong income basis and with strong interest levels throughout the ownership time. So that's about it for today's episode. That's episode 107 of the Rewarding Property Decisions podcast. As always, please feel free to share the podcast far and wide with friends and family. Obviously, as we've said before, have a look at us on YouTube if you would like to, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Otherwise, if you'd like further information, please visit our website, wakeland.com.au. Otherwise, we wish you all the best with your property